Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our July 27th Task Force meeting and discussion. Today, we are going to be featured by a distinguished group of leaders from our community that will speak to us about Pittsburgh police in schools, as well as some additional community advocacy by Minister Darnell Drury. We are asking everyone to please engage and ask questions so that we can gain as much information that we can from our speakers so that we can thoroughly respond to our charge and gather pertinent information that will strengthen the report that we are preparing to go forth. Following our presentation, we will continue the discussion and get some updates from our subcommittees and discuss any follow-up work that needs to come forward. Co-chair, Ms. Roberts, do you have any opening remarks before I turn it over to Bobby to introduce our speakers today? You're on mute. You're on mute.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't have anything to add. Thank you all, as always, for all of your time. And just look forward to hearing the panel discussion. In the meantime, I just got a text from Mr. Drury that he did not receive the Zoom information. I just passed that on to him. So he should be joining pretty shortly. But thank you.
All right, Bobby, will you introduce our panel for today?
Yeah, absolutely. I will not take a whole lot of time because I know everyone received in advance of the meeting a short description of our distinguished guests this evening and their very important work in the public school system. We have with us this evening Kathy Elliott, Sarah Goodkind, and Gada Makoshi. Gada, if I mispronounced your last name, please correct me. All three of these fabulous individuals have been hard at work with the Black Girls Equity Alliance, doing work in our schools to take a look at the disproportionate referrals of African American girls and boys. In fact, it's larger than most large cities across the United States. And so I welcome Kathy, Sarah, and Gada to share with us this evening their work with the Black Girls Equity Alliance and their potential recommendations for us to put forth in terms of the Pittsburgh Police Bureau's interaction with Pittsburgh Public Schools so that we might reduce the school to prison pipeline. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers.
Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Elliott, as she mentioned, and so Gada is going to share our slide presentation with you today. So we thank you for this opportunity and look forward to having your questions and addressing any concerns and questions that you would have at the end. So I will start this presentation by giving you a brief overview of what we're going to present today. I will share information about who we are as a group and the history behind the work that we've been doing over the past few years. Sarah will provide an overview of the data, which will highlight the arrest and referral to juvenile probation data from 2019. Next slide, please. And then Gada will provide information related to other contributing policies and practices, such as the use of summary citations that lead to the criminalization of Black youth here in the city. Gada will also present one of the main issues that we feel you can have a direct impact in addressing, which is the pending MOU between the City of Pittsburgh Police and the Pittsburgh Public School District. We will conclude by providing a review of a few key recommendations and solutions to decreasing and ultimately eliminating the disproportionate rate of Black youth being referred to the juvenile justice system. And then we will provide an example of a promising approach that is being used in the Philadelphia area that utilizes pre-arrest diversion options, and that has been successful for over the past 3 years or so, more than that. On the next slide, I'm going to provide you an overview of just who we are. And so in 2015, Gwen's Girls and the advisory members of the Gwendolyn J. Elliott Institute, that's the research arm of Gwen's Girls, started looking at what was happening with girls, and more specifically, Black girls in Allegheny County. We knew anecdotally that the girls that we were seeing every day and stories that we were hearing, that they were being referred to the various systems that we partner with. But we wanted to look at the data to really look at how we can address some of the issues, as well as come up with some of the solutions. This led us to participating in the inequities affecting Black girls in Allegheny County and Pittsburgh in 2016. From that, we held a summit to examine the issues that were highlighted in the report. And so the high disproportionate rate of referrals to juvenile justice and the child welfare system, the high and disproportionate rate of suspensions and expulsions, as well as high rates of negative health disparities were what we looked at. And then from there, it evolved into us looking at these different 4 areas as potential work groups. On the next slide, you will see, following the summit, over 75 organizations, and this continues to grow, 75 individuals and organizations form the Black Girls Equity Alliance. And so we are here today to just give you a presentation about some of the alarming information that we've been working on in the Juvenile Justice Work Group specifically, which is co-convened by Kim Booth, the Assistant Chief Probation Officer of Allegheny County Juvenile Court, and Dr. Sarah Goodkind. This work group includes professionals from the multiple systems with which Black youth are involved, including the Allegheny County Juvenile Probation Office, the Allegheny County Department of Human Services, and the Pittsburgh Police Department. And that's significant because, I've been talking to people across the country, and there's very few groups that have come together that have all the different entities that are impacting youth coming together in one. And so one of the significant things that we wanted to point out is that the data that we share today, as well as the data that you'll see in our reports, come directly from the individuals that work within the system. So it's not that we are going out and seeking or even coming up with this data on our own. These are entities that are sharing their information. And I feel like that is one of the key things that makes the work that we do most impactful and insightful, because we have the various systems that we are saying are, have these racial and systemic biases in their systems. They're coming to the table to have these conversations. So we've been meeting regularly for 3 years now, gathering information on local referrals to juvenile justice and listening to not only probation officers, police officers within Pittsburgh Public Schools, as well as the City Police Department. And I would like to just, plug right here that Commander Lando has been to many of our meetings and is a part of the Black Girls Equity Alliance. We've had defense attorneys, prosecuting attorneys, teachers, principals, service providers, and of course, young people meeting with us for us to learn about how we can prevent juvenile justice involvement. It's also important for me to point out that although our work is focused on Black girls, we recognize the importance of highlighting what is happening among all youth, especially Black males and those with disabilities. So in our reports and the work that you see us do, it will not only look at gender, but looking at Black girls, but we look at the cross-section of gender and race, and will always be reflected in our reports. And then lastly, we know that the policy changes that we advocate for Black girls will ultimately impact all youth. So last year, what you're seeing here is a report that we published, the Pathways to Juvenile Court here in Allegheny County. We will be releasing an updated report in a few weeks that highlights data from 2019, as well as recommendations that you can consider today when making your recommendations that specifically address the over-policing and ultimately the criminalization of Black youth in Pittsburgh. We will provide a brief overview of our findings for you today, starting with Dr. Goodkind. Dr. Goodkind.
Thanks, Kathy. And thanks to all of you for having us here today and for your work on this important task force. As you heard before, I'm a faculty member in the School of Social Work at Pitt and also the co-convener of the Black Girls Equity Alliance Juvenile Justice Work Group. I come to this work with 20 years of experience researching the juvenile justice system, where I would say the main thing I've learned is that most young people in juvenile justice serving without punishing justice use of citation, their parents with a warning. Most of the time when youth are arrested, they are referred then to the juvenile justice system. So on this first slide with data, this shows referrals to juvenile justice in Allegheny County because juvenile justice is administered at the county level. The good news is that juvenile justice referral rates in Allegheny County have been cut in half for most groups over the last 15 years, and this mirrors national trends. The bad news is that for girls, the racial disproportionality in referrals has increased during this time. And as you can see on this slide, the racial disproportionality in referrals to juvenile justice for both boys and girls is much worse locally than it is nationally. This is in part because our local referral rates for Black youth are higher than national referral rates for Black youth, and our local referral rates for white youth are lower than national referral rates for white youth. I want to note, actually even before we go to the next slide, that the differences in referral rates between Black and white youth cannot be accounted for by differences in behaviors. So just for one example, Black and white girls in Allegheny County have nearly identical rates of drug use. And we know this from the Healthy Allegheny Teen Survey, which surveyed a representative sample of teens in our county. However, Black girls in our county are 3 times more likely than white girls to be referred to juvenile justice for drug offenses. So that's just one example. I could give you many more of how differences in behaviors don't explain the differences we have in justice system involvement. And the next slide shows us the top juvenile justice referral sources in Allegheny County in 2019. Most juvenile justice referrals come from police via arrests, but they also come from district magistrates, schools, victims, and parents. So you can see here on this slide that the Pittsburgh police are the #1 referral source of Black boys, and that the Pittsburgh Public Schools police are the #1 referral source of Black girls, at the same time that district magistrates are the top referral source for white youth in our county. The next slide shows 2019 arrest rates, and this is just for Pittsburgh youth. Similar to referrals to juvenile justice, we see very high levels of racial disproportionality, higher than nationally, and again, these cannot be accounted for by differences in behaviors. Virtually all arrests of Pittsburgh youth are made by either city police or Pittsburgh Public Schools police. And this next slide shows the proportion of arrests of Black girls, white boys, and Black boys that are made by these 2 police forces, or that were made by them in 2019. And one thing of note on this slide is that 2/3 of all arrests of Black girls in Pittsburgh in 2019 were made by the Pittsburgh Public Schools police. Even though young people are only in school for about half the days of the year when you account for weekends and vacations, and not all Black students in Pittsburgh attend PPS. This slide also shows, of course, that far more Black youth in Pittsburgh are arrested than white youth, though their numbers in our population are very similar, and that's the different sizes of the pie charts there. This next slide shows additional details on arrests made by city police. And again, the main thing to note here is the extreme racial disproportionality that can't be accounted for by behavior. More than half of all arrests of Pittsburgh youth last year were made by PPS police, and this next slide shows what these arrests were for. Here you can see that over half of the arrests of Black girls and almost half of those of Black boys ultimately resulted in a charge of disorderly conduct. Disorderly conduct is a catch-all charge that includes things like being too noisy, cussing, and lots of other typical teenage behaviors. It's highly subjective, and there's a wealth of evidence that it is an offense for which implicit and explicit racial biases come into play. In 2019, every single arrest of a Pittsburgh Black girl that ultimately resulted in a charge of disorderly conduct was made by the PPS police. So just to sum up some of the important thoughts about the arrests, these slides have demonstrated that we're arresting Black youth in Pittsburgh at extremely high rates. Arrests of young people disrupt their schooling and life trajectories. For example, research that controls for background, delinquent behavior, and other relevant factors finds that an arrest doubles the likelihood that a student will drop out of high school, and that this effect is larger for students engaging in less serious behaviors. Other research shows that only about a quarter of students who are arrested during high school end up graduating. We don't have exact graduation and dropout rates for Pittsburgh students who are arrested, but we can say with certainty that our high arrest rates are having a detrimental effect on our students. And it is Black students, not white students, who experience high rates of arrest in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh public school students are arrested at 8 times the rate of students in Philadelphia public schools, in large part due to the pre-arrest diversion program that Philadelphia has instituted, which Gada will tell you a little bit more about in just a moment. Pre-arrest diversion provides an opportunity for youth to receive help and support and has been shown to reduce future delinquency. Therefore, one of the overarching recommendations that we offer you today is for Pittsburgh to implement a pre-arrest diversion program for youth, which would require collaboration between the police and the district attorney. And so I'm going to turn it over to Gada now to talk more about summary citations and the MOU.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Hi, my name is Gada Makushi, and I work for the ACLU as a community advocate. My focus is on school policing within Allegheny County. I'm going to start talking about summary citations and explain a little bit about what they are. So summary citations, as Sarah mentioned, are similar to traffic tickets. They're issued for minor infractions, usually typical teenage behavior, excessive noise, vaping, obscene gestures. Although they seem minor, they are harmful and they have collateral consequences. So they are considered adult criminal offenses. There is no distinction between adult and juveniles when it comes to citations, unlike in juvenile court. Additionally, youth are not provided with legal counsel, so they may not even understand what all of their rights are. If a student fails to show up to their summary trial, so when you get a citation, you have to show up in front of a magistrate. If a youth does not show up, they can be tried in absentia, and the trial may be conducted without their presence. And although that child could appeal within 30 days, again, they have no legal counsel, and so most don't know how or even that they can do this. Summary citations typically result in fines, and this is how these minor infractions quickly escalate. So if youth are unable to pay these fines, they are then charged separately with what's called failure to comply and referred to juvenile justice. Failure to comply charges actually account for at least 1/3 of all referrals to juvenile justice in Allegheny County. So a youth could get a citation for vaping and end up in juvenile court because they couldn't pay fines. It's essentially punishing poverty and an inability to pay. Additionally, there's a record of these criminal convictions that cannot be expunged until 5 years after all conditions have been met. So to give you an example, let's say a youth receives a summary citation at 14 and immediately pays all of the fines. If at 18 years old, they are trying to apply to college, a job, or the military, and they are asked on the application if they have ever been convicted of a crime, they must say yes, even though it could have been for vaping or for being excessively loud. As we get into the data of summary citations, we can see that nearly 70% of citations issued by city police are to Black youth, even though they account for only 40% of the youth population in Pittsburgh. Black youth are also 10 times more likely than their white youth to be referred to juvenile justice for this failure to comply charge. Disorderly conduct was the most frequent charge cited, and 86% of all of those disorderly conduct charges were issued to Black youth, again, even though they only account for 40%. There is no minimum age for a summary citation. With arrests, the minimum age is 10. There is no minimum age with a citation. So when we looked at our data in 2018, we saw that a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old were both issued a summary citation for fighting. Looking at all of this, our recommendation is to place a moratorium on issuing summary citations to youth until issues around disproportionality can be addressed and clear guidelines can be established around if and when to issue summary citations to youth. So moving on to the memorandum of understanding between the school district and city police. Pennsylvania state law requires that all school districts in Pennsylvania have an MOU with local law enforcement. This MOU between PPS and Pittsburgh City Police is not a contract, but it does set guidelines to ensure that both parties have a shared understanding of the role and responsibilities in maintaining safe schools. Since 2017, the ACLU has been negotiating with the school board to make changes to the MOU on issues that violate the privacy of students and that lead to the overcriminalization of youth, particularly Black youth and youth with disabilities. And while some progress has been made, this current draft still overuses police and interventions with youth. So currently, all school districts in Pennsylvania are required to call law enforcement if a student commits any one of 24 infractions. However, in this current draft, their proposal is to add an additional 7 infractions for immediate reporting to city police, even though that is not required by state law. These are listed here. And while some of them may sound serious, they may in reality just be very minor youth-like behavior. So things like throwing a ball at another student and it misses could be simple assault. A student who was suspended but came to school because they didn't have anywhere to go or didn't even realize they were suspended, criminal trespass. So school officials have a responsibility to distinguish between incidents which state law requires them to immediately contact police and issues in which they have discretion. They do not have to call police for every incident. So as far as we know, Pittsburgh Public Schools would be the only district in the entire state that would require schools to call city police for these 7 infractions. And having these infractions listed will exacerbate the racial disproportionality in the arrest and referral of Black students and students with disabilities in our district. So our recommendation to you is to ask for the removal of these 7 discretionary offenses from Section 2A of the MOU to allow schools the discretion to determine the appropriate resolution. And then to recap on the recommendations that we've listed so far is remove the 7 discretionary offenses from Section 2A from the MOU, place a moratorium on issuing summary citations to youth until issues around disproportionality can be addressed and clear guidelines established, and implement a pre-arrest diversion program similar to Philadelphia, and I'll explain a little bit more about that right now. So the Philadelphia Police School Diversion Program is a pre-arrest diversion. So the goal was to reduce arrests and racial disparities in arrest rates and to increase school retention. When an incident occurs, school police contact a dedicated staff person at the Philadelphia Police Department. The PPD determines whether that offense is eligible. If the offense is serious, the student is arrested. If it's a summary misdemeanor, they call the intake center. And diverted youth receive an initial home visit from the Department of Human Services and police within 72 hours. They are then referred to the appropriate community provider for services such as academic support, social and emotional competency building, mentoring, parental involvement, etc. Eligible youth for their first offense are offered a chance to participate in this diversion program. No arrest is made, whether they agree to join this program or not. Most do participate. And here are the results of the program. So in the first year, arrests dropped by 50%, in year 4 by 71%, and last year, which I think was probably their 6th year, arrests dropped to 187 students, while Pittsburgh arrested 266. So as Sarah stated earlier, that made arrests at Pittsburgh Public Schools 8 times the rate of Philadelphia Public Schools. And that is the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for your time. Kathy, do you want to conclude?
Yeah, so as Gada said, thank you very much for this opportunity. We will provide these slides, this presentation, and then the following slides give you information, more background about who we are and where we receive the data, as well as links to different reports and different resources that you can use to kind of further educate yourself on the data. And so I think another thing to point out, and it's one of the links that's there, is that these systems have a dashboard. The Allegheny County dashboard actually you have access to be able to draw down on real-time data to be able to see what's actually happening here in the county. And then it's by neighborhoods as well, so you can look at that as well. So any questions? I know we went through that quickly because we wanted to be very mindful of your time, but we're available now and then even afterwards. So you see our emails. If you have any additional questions even after this presentation, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
I have a question. The pre-arrest diversion program that you highlight from Philadelphia, you indicated that the police and the DA would need to cooperate. I'm assuming also the school district. Can you talk about what would need to be in place to be able to move forward with that kind of a program?
So in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, it was actually the commissioner, Kevin Bethel, that was tired of seeing youth arrested at such high rates with Pittsburgh Public Schools. And so he coordinated, I think, with Drexel University, with Philadelphia Public School District, with the Department of Health. In one of the links we have a report that summarizes actually all of the different organizations and kind of how he did it. And that is, I can put a link in the chat too, but it was a collaborative effort by everybody that touches youth in some way there to make sure that they had all of the supports in place to be able to help them through this diversion program and to minimize the chances of rearrest.
So
Patricia, do you have a question?
Yeah, not so much a question as much as a comment. Thank you very much for this presentation. I think it's really important and vital that we talk about this. And the question that I do have is, how would you see this rolled out, and what can we do as the Police Reform Task Force to bring this into fruition? A lot of the conversation that we've heard is that the Pittsburgh Police and the Pittsburgh Police and Public Schools are not the same entities. So how would you like to see us tackle that challenge? And thanks again for your presentation and the work you do.
So one of the things that I highlighted when I was speaking was the MOU itself. I mean, that's the first step. It's clear in the attorney from the city law department as well as Pittsburgh Public Schools have been meeting for a while now. And so there is this opportunity, as Gada pointed out, to not make it. We know that an MOU needs to exist, and what we didn't talk about is how there hasn't been one for 10 years or so, but they're finally working on it. And so we are recommending that it doesn't be a document or a process that is more punitive that it even needs to be. And so adding the addition of those seven areas that was highlighted in our presentation is what not only the ACLU, the Education Law Center, many organizations that have been advocating on making sure that this MOU is equitable and doesn't further criminalize students, and particularly Black students. So this is one specific area that you all can, maybe address and have a recommendation, if not to the law department, to the mayor, on having a stronger voice in this process.
And
Thank you very much.
Just to add to that, I just want to add real quick to what Kathy was saying. Also, in the other report that we're working on now, we also recommend eliminating PPS police. We didn't talk about that today because we wanted to focus on things that we felt were more under the purview of this task force, being part of the city. But I actually was really surprised to find that more than half of all arrests of Pittsburgh youth were being done by Pittsburgh Public Schools police, right? That we have really high arrest rates in our schools compared with other places, as we talked about multiple times. So, you know, I don't know if that's something that you all want to include in your report or not, or how much that.
Yes, it is.
Okay, well, we have.
Yes, it is, very much
There
so.
are some other, we are, as Kathy was saying, we're working on a report that'll be out in just a couple of weeks, and it has some more details on that, and recommending like reallocating those funds from police to social workers, counselors, other support staff for students.
That is definitely within the wheelhouse of this task force, and particularly those of us who are on the subcommittee to unbundle the police is what we're calling the defunding. And it would be vital for us to have your information so that we can hit that to happen. So definitely, if we could receive that, that would be great. And thank you for bringing that up.
So right now we're waiting for it to go to the printer, but we probably can talk amongst the group and probably release a draft for you all to see, depending on how, because I know that this group is, your recommendations are time sensitive, and so we will make sure that you have the information.
Thank you very much. We look forward to it.
So I was going to ask a question about rehabilitation, but which you had mentioned at the beginning, but staying on this topic for a minute, I'm still trying to get my mind around how it works right now. So the Pittsburgh Public Police, the Pittsburgh Public School Police officers, what are we calling them? Officers? Where do they come from? Like where are they coming from versus the MOU with the police department and the school? I'm still a little confused as to the structure.
So the MOU is a negotiation between the school district and local law enforcement. So the Pittsburgh City Police, Pittsburgh Public Schools Police are police officers. They have the same training, but their jurisdiction is only on school grounds or school events. And whether they are armed or whatever they are allowed to carry is also the jurisdiction of the school. And so currently our Pittsburgh school police officers are unarmed.
So they work directly for the school district?
They work for the district. They're members of the teachers union. And there are only about 20 or 22 of them. So some of them—
20, yeah.
Yeah. Some of them are stationed every day in the high schools. That's my understanding. And then some of them are, you know, kind of floating between schools.
So there's the officers that work directly for the schools, and then the MOU with the city police and the schools covers what? Like, what is that meant to address?
So that is to set the guidelines for what city police, like when they should enter the schools, under like what circumstances, under which offenses, kind of to set a guideline for what this outside police department can do. Again, it's not a contract, it's just an agreement, but between what they can do on school grounds. So for example, in the MOU, he said, let's say a student has a warrant out for their arrest. Do you actually have to go onto school grounds and arrest them? Like, is that really the best way? Because now that child is going to be scared of going to school, right? So we put into place a number of things that city police have to consider before entering school grounds to arrest a student. Things like that. We can send you a copy of the MOU. It's a public document.
Well, yeah, that would be helpful. I mean, I guess I'm just trying to get my head around when there's a disciplinary issue or something happening at the school. I'm assuming it's the PPS officers that go first.
And or they have the ability to call the city police.
Okay, so that's my question. So how often does that happen? I mean, like, is it very rare or a lot?
It's not rare. It's
no.
So, yeah, it goes to the police in general, and then they determine whether it's going to the school police or to the city police. So I can give you an example. In 1 year, teachers and principals called for police 1,400 times. So that's a lot. Obviously, all of those did not result in arrests. So maybe 1/4 did. But it shows to us that there's an over-reliance on policing. And so often what happens is that if the school police are in the building, they will be the ones that deal with it. And if not, then it's whoever's closest usually responds. So whether it's city or whether it's school police. So like elementary schools do not have school police officers, just the high schools. have them stationed. And then there's like, I think 11 police officers that kind of roam between all of the different schools.
But so when we say, I don't remember what the statistic was. I think Sarah, you said like 60-some% of arrests are by school officers. Are we saying those are by school officers, or are we just saying those are by school officers or even city officers that go into the school by request?
Those were ones made actually by the PPS police officers.
So there's more arrests in schools that are done by the city police department.
Yes.
And that's why we broke it out by
I
the
see.
city police arrests as well as school police arrests. And that's the significance that I talked about in having, data analysis from the Pittsburgh Police Department has been working with us. So it's not like we're pulling these numbers from, random places. They're giving us their data. So they're telling us how many times their police officers are showing up. And then because the school districts haven't been as transparent, and I just, I'm gonna just say because they don't have the capability at this point to give us all that information the way that it needs to be given. But, it's important for us to kind of, as you're trying to, the questioning is like, where are these coming from? That's what we spent 3 years asking ourselves, like, who's making these arrests? Why are they making these arrests? Where is this coming from? And so that's why it's very specific. So the data that you'll see in our report, as well as when we send you the slides from this presentation, is broken down by city police as well as school district police.
And one other thing, I want to add 2 other things to that. One, the Black Girls Equity Alliance, we wrote a letter to the board of PPS and also to the teachers union that detail some of this, so we can share those with you because they have some more information. But also at one of our meetings, some of the PPS police came to one of our our juvenile justice work group meetings, and we listened to them and asked them questions to try to understand exactly what Kathy was saying. And one thing that they said was that sometimes they refer young people to juvenile justice because they feel like it's the only way they can be sure that they will get mental health services. It's the only way they can kind of force that. And that is an extremely problematic thing. I've heard that in other localities. That is not unique to Pittsburgh, but that is not how we should be supporting young people. And so I think, sometimes they think that they're helping youth by referring them because they're having challenges, they want them to get services, but we need to find a better way.
Angela?
Thank you. And also, thank you very much for the presentation. That was extremely helpful. And I encourage everyone on the task force who hasn't read their letters yet to either the board or to the teachers union to read those. I need a little bit of help with one of your recommendations. I just want to make sure I have it right. So where PPS requires the police to be called in certain situations, that's the one. So you're recommending that now go to the level of the and they use their discretion?
So state law made a list, and they have their own model MOU. So they have a list of 24 offenses or 24 infractions, which they have deemed as requiring police intervention. So that school districts are required, and if a student commits any of these 24 offenses, the schools are required to call police. Then they have a list of things that are discretionary. So you could call the police, but you're not required to call the police. And what is in this MOU is it is now trying to combine those by taking 7 of those discretionary offenses and saying, no, we are saying the schools now have to call the police for these 7 as well. Not a discretion, but like you have to call them. And so in some of these situations, and I didn't really go into it here, but if you read the MOU, particularly the part about students with disabilities, if a student with a disability, for example, is somebody touched them and perhaps they like try and push them away, they could be charged with simple assault, right? Instead of the schools being able to say, well, let's look at the IEP let's see if we need to create a manifestation determination or a report to see if the students' needs are being met. They now no longer have that discretion. Because those 7 offenses are required, they have to call police. And now students with disabilities are going to be criminalized for things that really just needed a different solution. So that's why we're saying take out those 7. It's not that the schools can't call police, but you're not requiring them to call police.
And do you have a sense of whether or not schools will then use other options, or do you think they're still going to end up calling the police because that's what they're used to doing?
So that one's been a little bit of a struggle. And I mean, I think most of us know that schools are severely understaffed. And then I think that's part of what our recommendations was when we were saying, you know, get rid of the Pittsburgh school police, is to replace them with social workers and counselors and other support, even community support that can help take the place. It's a shift from what they've been doing. So I think it'll take a little while, and it requires the school board making different policies.
And I think Kathy said before, right now, Pittsburgh Public Schools is not doing a good job of tracking when they're calling the police and when not, and for who and for what offenses. And that's part of what we've been recommending as well, is that we need to hold them accountable for keeping track. As Kathy said before, none of the information that we shared with you, and we have a bunch more information in this report, none of it came from the schools because they don't have that information. And so we had to go to a lot of other places to try to learn and understand this. And I think from some of our conversations with school board members, they didn't realize there were such high rates of arrests being made by PPS police. They had no idea. And so that's part of why we're asking them to start to track this, because if you don't know, you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, they paid attention to, they have been on the suspension data, but they really were, kind of blindsided by what was happening around the arrest and referral data. And so I would like to say that they have been responsive in trying to figure out how they can address this issue as well in a collaboration.
Thank you.
Richard?
So there's a couple questions or things that I want to go over. Doesn't each school district have to put in a safe schools report on issues that we're talking about right now as well? And that should be in their reports of what actions to take when you break a rule or something. The second thing that I wanted to also ask about was there's diversion programs. The Foundation of Hope has a diversion program that is working closely with on the north side. And then there's the LEAD program. Both of them, I think, are following some of the same issues or the same things that Philadelphia is. So I want to make sure that we don't leave those things out when we have programs here that are attempting to do the things around diversion right now. I'm getting a little from my knowledge of working even with the Pittsburgh Public Schools, I know that they will call if it's a violent infraction, a gun, rape, murder. Are we saying that we want to take that away from the Pittsburgh Public School Police?
Absolutely not. And so let me just start with your first comment. So the Foundation of Hope and Jeff Williams is a part of this collaboration. And so we are very aware of that program. The majority, from my understanding, the majority of his cases is post-arrest. What we're talking about is this pre-contact, right? And so, and I believe that if something was to happen, it should be his organization and him actually being able to do this pre-arrest diversion piece as well. So I'm all about not duplicating what has already been being done and being done well. So that's the first thing. Secondly, no, we're absolutely not saying that the police shouldn't be called for violent offenses and things like that. In fact, you can see on our slides, the majority of cases that end up in our kids being referred to the juvenile justice system was disorderly conduct. So, and it's very rare where it, involves a weapon or, rape or anything like that. That would go against everything that we stand for and advocate for if we were to say that the police shouldn't get involved and address these issues. It's the minor offenses, and that's why, we're going to share additional data. It's the minor offenses, those that are so subjective that end up criminalizing our kids for behaviors that they should not. So like a girl being disrespectful and not, turning in her cell phone when she was supposed to. And we can give you anecdotal, specific cases. One of the things that we did do is pull like 3 cases randomly. Okay, let's pull with these failure to pay fines, these disorderly conducts. What are they? One was a fine, and that ended up going to juvenile court, where a child was fined, I believe, $200 for throwing an object in a retail store. Didn't injure, didn't hurt anybody, but the fine was $200. Obviously, they didn't have the money to pay it, and then that ended up being a charge. So those are the things that we're talking about. We're talking about, even in the school, different altercations. One of the things that Gwen's Girls is doing a diversion program, and one of the things that I see all the time is there's a fight. So we know those girl fights, they're a problem, but we need to find out how can we resolve them without the criminal justice system getting involved. And so in many instances, there's this fight, there's no major injuries. The girls get 10-day suspension, but then petitions are filed, right, at juvenile court. So 3 months later, they're back being friends again, majority of the time. Now they got to go in front of a judge to, talk about what happened in this incident. If there's any restitution, we definitely say they need to be, held accountable and pay the restitution. But then there may be fines levied if it's at the magistrate level. And so it's those types of systemic practices that happen that we're saying personnel in schools, social workers, counselors, mediators that can help to address these issues rather than trying to put it through juvenile probation, where they don't get the services and supports, and the staff, the probation officers are great people and provide the supports, but they are the ones that will tell you like the mental health treatment that people think that they're going to get in being on probation. It just doesn't happen. And so how do we as adults and leaders in systems put those services in the schools and following incidences that happen, especially those that aren't egregious, that don't involve a victim or those, crimes that you talked about? Absolutely not, Richard. We would never be advocating for police not to be called for those types of situations. Absolutely not.
I agree. I agree with everything that you just said, Kathy. I just want to be sure when, what are we asking for? You asking for more social workers, because right now in the Pittsburgh Public Schools, I know that the social workers are overworked and overwhelmed.
Absolutely.
There's not enough social workers to address some of the issues that some of these young people are coming to school with. Also, the DHS and Arborlee. So we have a large amount of young people that are homeless. And I'm hoping that we can also address that issue as we move forward with this, because and those aren't even tracked on how many. I don't know if DHS has a real good number on how many homeless kids that we have, not only in the city of Pittsburgh, but in Allegheny County. And I don't know if that's something that y'all have looked at.
We have in a separate work group, but we definitely look at what's happening in child welfare. And even, it's the department called Focused on Attendance that they track, where the kids are, who's truant, you know, and to provide those supports. But again, a lot of times those kids end up in the juvenile justice or child welfare system. We don't want them in the child welfare. We don't want DHS touching them either. If there's some supports that could be provided prior to them be involved in any system, that's what our goal should be, right? And so I agree with you 100%. And post-COVID, it's probably going to be worse, you know? And so how do we wrap the supports that are necessary around our families to make sure that they don't become criminalized and end up in systems? Because once they get involved in a system, it's hard for them to get out. Yep. So, yeah, 100%, you know, working with DHS. And I would say that they're probably one of the strongest partners in this work because they're the ones that have been keeping the data around what's happening. So I would, you know, venture to say that they do have a good handle on homelessness and who needs the supports and what school districts and what areas need more supports than others.
Okay. Thank
David.
you.
David.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your work and this excellent presentation. Very, very informative. I'll start with a couple of comments and then a question or two. Number one, it's just completely unacceptable that a district could be calling the police 1,400 times on kids and not tracking anything about it. That is totally unacceptable. Totally unacceptable. That should not be allowed. That may not come within our police reform bailiwick, but it's just, it can't go on like that. What I'm most interested in is this idea that so many of the offenses that you're talking about for which police are called are very minor and even subjective. And it mirrors a lot of other things that happen in the criminal legal system when we talk about law enforcement too. If it's a very rare thing to have police called for more serious crimes, I know it would really help us to have a very, very good handle on just how rare that is, to have those numbers, to know exactly what's going on. Because if one of your recommendations is to get rid of or abolish the PPS police, if they're not really needed, the one question we will have is the one that Richard posed. You know, don't you want them for the serious stuff? And so the question will be, can that need be filled by Pittsburgh police? Do you want it to be filled by Pittsburgh police? Is that a better alternative? Because there has to be something to cover that. The idea that, you know, hundreds and hundreds of kids are being criminalized because of yelling in the hallways or, you know, pushing each other or things like that. Is it your read on this that the schools are simply making these calls because they simply don't have the staff or the wherewithal or the resolve to handle these disciplinary problems themselves, or have they just gotten used to it, or what?
Yep, all of the above.
Yeah, I think
they've been used to. That's what happens if a kid they feel disruptive and they don't want to deal with it, then let's call the police. And so that's why we wrote a letter to the teachers union, PFT, to say, you know, we are, you know, looking at holding the school board and what's happening in the district and the superintendent accountable, but be clear that we understand that it's the teachers that are making these calls. And that was one of the things that the police said, like, you know, they get called all the time when the school police for incidences that they have to then say, no, I'm not filing charges for that, you know? And so it's not just a rare occasion. We don't have the documentation on what schools is happening at the most. And that would be, you know, something that the school district needs to look at. But this is an area that, you know, just last month we, you know, advocated on the school code of conduct was being renewed. And that was one of the areas that we were saying this disorderly conduct charge needs to be eliminated, right? And so when you start to look at that, and one of the slides that we have has the statistics on the crime, the number of incidences. So you know, you can look at that once you get the information, but our report also goes into like some of those specifics. But, you know, again, just like we had conversations, and I'm just gonna put this out there, we had conversations with the data analysis from the city police department. You all can ask them to come and give you some updated information as well. That I would challenge you all to do that.
And I just want to add to real quick to what Kathy was saying. One, actually DHS did some analyses, so we do know some of the schools that are calling the most.
Yeah, we
So we're working on getting that there, or we're just
being able to share that information.
Learning, right. And yes, we need permission even to be able to talk about it and share it, although of course it should be public, and I don't know why that shouldn't be completely transparent. I think also like what we see is that people use the tools that they have in front of them. So when there's a police officer all the time in your school and someone's being rowdy in class, that's who the teacher calls, right? But if there's different resources available, that's who they'll call. And we saw in the Gender Equity Commission report that Pittsburgh Public Schools refers students to law enforcement, not just Black students, white students too, at rates higher than 95% of other large cities in the US. So we're at the very top of that, right? I would think that having police in schools is related to that. Having police that are there all the time is probably part of that story. But whatever it is, like, there's no reason. Young people in Pittsburgh do not have worse behavior than young people other places, so we need to do better.
Thank you. Appreciate your work.
Hey, Daniel.
Sorry, can I just add a quick comment for David? Pennsylvania Department of Education does track some of this too, even though it's not disaggregated. But if you were to go onto their website, it breaks down every single school, school district and every school within Pennsylvania. It tells you how many times the police have come. It's underreported, but basically it'll say interactions with police, and then it'll say under that arrests.
Thank you.
Nathaniel?
Thank you, Kathy, Sarah, and Gada for your presentation. It was really helpful and informative. I was curious if you might be able to just provide sort of a background update on how the conversations to date have gone with regard to your recommendations with the PPS school board / superintendent, as well as, I guess, the teachers union is the way it sounds. I'm curious to know what reception you've gotten. You know, what are they supportive of? What are they having reservations around, and why? And then one other question I had as well is, who is pushing for the 7 discretionary offenses in the MOU? I'm curious what's driving that for, so if you could give a little bit of background, that would just be helpful to understand the different actors that are kind of playing within this MOU and the recommendations that you're pushing for.
I'll answer the last 2. So as far as who's pushing for the 7, it depends on who you ask. So the Pittsburgh Public Schools have told us that it is the city police that have added it in, and the city police are saying that they don't remember how that got in. So, yeah, it's in there though. As far as conversations with PFT, I would say that when we talked to the teachers, overwhelmingly, what we heard was some of the teachers want police no matter what. And others said we could get on board with no police if you give us something instead, if you put some other type of support in the schools for us to use. So that's been our conversation. As far as the district, and Kathy can also talk a little bit about that, is of the current 9 school board members, we do not think that this year we will be able to get rid of school police. 5 out of the 9 do not seem willing to budge. So that's kind of been my interactions with them, but I'm sure Kathy has more.
So I've been having preliminary meetings with the superintendent as well as the president of the PFT to kind of determine where's the common ground, because at the end of the day, we just can't, say I'm for, I'm against, and just keep on going back and forth of why. Like, what's the solution? And my focus has been, how do we address this disproportionate rate of Black children being referred to the juvenile justice system and being criminalized? And so a lot of the kind of pushback and argument has been like, the police are the supports that the students need, and they are their coaches, they are their friends. And so many of you already know I come from a law enforcement family. I understand the importance of, just an officer being community oriented, but at the end of the day, that's still not their role. right? It's a contradiction when we have all this high rate of referrals of Black children to the juvenile justice system with, police officers or security guards also who have this authority over the process, being the ones that kind of guide and gauge their interactions and the referrals to the juvenile justice system. And so, although they may be well-intended, it's just, again, we need to redefine roles. And that's the language that I've been using with not only the superintendent, but the PFT in understanding the roles of police. What should they be doing? And what are the roles of the supports that should be in place? And so once we start to address that, I feel like the argument of, should police be there or not will be mitigated, because we're providing the therapeutic and social supports that our kids need, that there won't be this heightened need to call a law enforcement officer to address an issue that typically is handled by supports. So, and in a nutshell, they have been receptive, understanding, especially I wouldn't say crazy, I can't think of the word right now, but as you all heard, we've been at this work for over 3 to 4 years, and many people have been addressing this longer than that. But we have, as a group, been specifically looking at this, and it hasn't been until this recent unrest, racial unrest, that people really have taken a closer look to say, like, oh yes, this is an issue. And so that's, the area that I'm concerned about and focused on, the racial element that permeates this school district, and has the leaders, the teachers, relying on a system, relying on law enforcement to address issues that should be handled in a social support type of way.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm understanding, though. It sounds like the PFT has not taken an official position with regard to the MOU yet, whether they're supportive of it or not. You've gotten feedback from members, but the PFT itself as an official body has not had a position, it sounds like.
No, and then when I say
they don't, yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say that they're not involved in the MOU. It's just between district. So the district is an entire entity, and then the city police. The PFT has taken a stand on whether we should get rid of police, and because the union, they have said no.
Okay, and that's helpful.
And then the other thing that I was going to add is that, so the National Teachers Union, the AFT, I'm going to share their stance, and it is to, remove police and look at a more equitable system for Black students. And so what I'm challenging the PFT is to look at some of those recommendations and follow those as well.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Valerie?
Thank you, Dr. Bullock. I have a ton of questions that I will send at a later, but some that I think would be good for the group is, Sarah said that the report will share alternative recommendations. That is a good thing. As someone who is still very involved in the Pittsburgh schools as a grandmother, and one school that probably has a good lion's share of a lot of arrest records, seen it firsthand, been in a hallway during an arrest. Teachers do need support. They do need support. It is very difficult in some of the classrooms. So there do need to be alternatives. However, will you all recommend a school-based health clinic? They were instituted back in the 90s, I would say early 90s. And unfortunately for some of the high schools like Bashir, Westinghouse, Perry, et cetera, it was a funding issue. But is there going to be recommendations to collaborate with healthcare institutions such as an Allegheny Health Network, UPMC? There tends to be deeper pockets there. to be able to establish the type of mental health component for de-escalation, for mediation, etc., for dealing with mental health problems that some students experience. Will there be a recommendation for a school-based health clinic, which actually kind of solves a lot of the problems? It takes the school police off of being the mediators, and it also allows them to deal with the hard problems, like David said, you know, the hard stuff. I can say the other question is parents. Has there been a parental component? Because the last that I know, parents of children in the schools want security. They don't know how that happens, but I guarantee you they do not want armed security in those schools. They don't want guns in the schools. They want guns out of the schools. So the alternatives to that is complicated. You know, you want security, but I'm not going to go into it. I'm just saying, parents, is there a parental component as far as their input? That is immensely important to what school board members want to do. That's their constituency, and those are the vested interests. So parents and health clinic.
Yes, so we haven't made a specific recommendation such as the clinic itself, but having social supports. And so what, you know, the strategy that I'm trying to take is having these initial meetings with the superintendent and the PFT to get the key stakeholders. So like all the universities that can bring resources to the table, all the foundations that can bring resources to the table, as well as parents. Like this needs to be a collective approach in addressing this issue. And so that is what we talked about. So in the next few weeks, there's going to be a meeting with some preliminary stakeholders that, you know, kind of run the specific entities, right? But then it's going to be opened up to the general population and community to be able to, you know, elicit the supports and to really it be a community-driven, parent-driven kind of solution, because we know that, and that's the thing that we have said all the time, like the school district can't do it on their own. There's just too many issues that are happening. And so they have to become more transparent and allowing individuals and those that can support and step up and provide the resources that will be needed definitely need to be at the table. So the answer is preliminarily, yes. We have thought about those things, but again, even the work that we've done in the Black Girls Equity Alliance, that's why it has been so impactful to have systems leaders at the table with us. So having probation at the table and having child welfare at the table, because we can sit all day and talk about policies that we want to have implemented, but because we're not a part of that system, we're not in the leadership of that system, that doesn't mean that they want to take our recommendations and even put them forward. So.
And I just want to add to that, because I think, Valerie, both of those are really important points, right? And one, I know that UPMC and already does come into a lot of PPS schools and offer mental health services. So there are some arrangements where that's already happening. I've done field visits for my social work students, so I've seen it in action. But absolutely, I think though, you know, in PPS, a lot of the social workers who work for PPS are doing attendance, and we need to make better use of the social workers that we have. That some of that work is to be done by paraprofessionals, which would free up social workers' time to really do some of the mental health supports we want. And then on the second point, yes, parents are so important. I'm a PPS parent of a middle school and a high school student. So I ask my kids a lot about what they observe with the police and security guards and their perceptions and you know what their friends see, and I talk to a lot of parents, and I think we need to talk to a broad range of parents, and parents need to, you know, and I mean, of course I'm concerned about safety in schools too, but I don't think we need police in our schools, and I really see so many kids who need support that we're just not providing right now. So,
thank you.
We have time for the 2 more questions because we do have one. We have couple more things to cover. We have Bobby, then Sharon, then Tim.
Thank you. I want to kind of circle us back to where our leverage points are with recommendations to the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police. And so I think one of you mentioned that we haven't had an MOU with PPS for 10 years. And then Nat actually asked my question about who's recommending the 7 additional offenses. So it seems to me that's a really important consideration for this committee. So I'm wondering, why hasn't there been an MOU to your knowledge? And it seems like we ought to be pushing for the clarity around the MOU and certainly about what offenses are listed in that MOU.
Yeah, so they've been,
Go ahead.
they've been out of compliance for almost 11 years now. And I think it was really after, I think it was Eugene DePasquale called them out for it. And maybe that was 3 or 4 years ago, because that's about what they started really trying to push for an MOU.
When you say they're out of compliance, is it the Bureau of Police or the school district?
The school district. All school districts are required to have an MOU. And even though, yeah, so they haven't had a negotiated MOU since state law required it roughly 10 or 11 years ago.
So I'm curious then, if it's, you know, the school district that's out of compliance, how do we make this a bigger issue for the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police to attend to?
It's a negotiation between both of them. So both sides have to agree in order for this to be accepted. And so we have already spoken to the school board, and we're hoping that we have some buy-in from them to be able to pass removing that. But we also need the city police to agree to it, because if both sides don't agree to it, then there is no negotiation and that MOU does not take place. So we need you to push for the city police to agree to remove these 7 infractions.
So it seems like a pretty important point of leverage then for this task force to consider making that type of recommendation. Thank you for the clarification.
Sharon?
So I wanted to go back to Sarah. I think you were talking about that Pittsburgh school police report 95% more incidents, or refer 95%. What was that?
No, what I said is that, yeah, good question, because I didn't present that in the presentation. Our Pittsburgh, when compared with 89 other cities, we're in the top 5%, let's say, of the highest referral rates to law enforcement. So basically, we're among the top. You know, it's slightly different rates we compared sort of referral rates of Black boys in Pittsburgh with referral rates of Black boys in other cities, and referral rates of white boys in Pittsburgh with referral rates of white boys in other cities. So compared with the same group of youth in other cities, our referral rates to law enforcement for all the groups are it's a little bit different for each group, but they're in that. Overall, it averages out to be in the top 5%. So we're just referring all youth to law enforcement at rates higher than in other cities.
And what do you, I mean, I know this is an opinion, but what do you attribute that to?
So, yeah, and I mean, I don't have the whole answer. I do think part of it is having a PPS police force. A lot of districts don't have their own police. So many other cities do. We're not unique, but when you have your own police force, it's a lot easier to call the police than when you have to call the city. Which I think, again, makes the MOU even more important if we're talking about getting rid of school police, then what you can call for and what you can't is really essential to work out with city police. But schools can always call city police, and city police can get there quickly.
So I guess I'm just trying to get a sense of, and Patricia talked about this earlier, we're talking about unbundling. So making sure that there's other city services available, you know, outside of schools even. Other city services that are robust and available and handling things that maybe the police don't need to be handling on a day-to-day basis. And so it seems like part of it has got to be, and this is not what we're technically supposed to be looking at, but it might be just worth us sort of making a recommendation about making sure there's other services in the schools so that the school police aren't overburdened with every disorderly conduct thing that might come up. So that's sort of just a comment for our committee to be thinking about. But my last question, and this might be very basic and naive, what is the difference between the Pittsburgh public school police officers and school resource officers?
So a school, we don't have school resource officers, but a lot of districts do. A school resource officer is a police officer who's employed by the city police department and is contracted to work with the city police department.
You're cutting off.
Well, I got that if the school resource officer works for the city police, do you all have strong feelings about if there were no school police officers, whether we should have school resource officers, or is that basically, do you come to the same results, I guess?
The same results, if not worse.
If not worse.
It's also a budgetary issue, Sarah. It's a matter of what budget it comes from, the city budget or the Pittsburgh Public School budget. But I can say that Chief Schubert had alluded to considering a cadre of resource officers within the Bureau of Police to deal with these type of issues with children, schools, etc. Sorry to interrupt, but I had to clarify.
No, I just want to add to that. I don't know if any of you listened to the testimony for the school board at the June meeting. There were so many people testifying on both sides about keeping or getting rid of PPS police. But and I sent in my own testimony, and then I listened to all of the first day, which was like 4 hours. And one thing that I found really, really interesting was that a lot of the people, most of the people who spoke in favor of keeping PPS police were talking about what Kathy was saying before about the relationships, the positive relationships between these police officers and students. And all I could think when I was listening to that is that, of course, we want our students to have positive relationships with adults, and especially adults who have similar backgrounds and experiences that to them, but those don't need to be police officers. Then let's make sure we have some more mentors and adults in our schools that can provide those relationships. But like Kathy was saying, there's a fundamental conflict of interest when the person that you are going to confide in and trust with your problems and things you're dealing with is also the person that has the power to arrest or cite you. I just don't think that's how we want to have it set up.
And so basically, as I said, redefining the roles. Like, you can keep those same people that have been in the schools and have the relationships with the students, keep them there, but remove that element of law enforcement, because a lot of times they have those relationships without it being a law enforcement type of relationship. So we're not saying that the kids don't need that type of support, or the schools or the teachers or the culture, but just again, we have to look at that law enforcement element, that ability to arrest that's happening often in our schools.
I had a couple questions. First of all, Gwen, I was gonna call you Gwen.
I know you do it all the time, but that's okay.
Your mother would be very proud of you. I'm serious.
Thank you, thank you.
Thanks you for continuing what you're doing. She would be very proud of you. I can't believe that the Pittsburgh Public School Security has no records to say the number of arrests and what type. Is that what you said?
So they have records, but the way that they have generated, I guess from what I've been told, I'm just telling you what I've been told because we've asked. And I would think that, and I tend to believe those that are saying it, so the school board members and members of superintendent's office, because they are reactionary. And so if they had some information to kind of diffute what we're talking about, it would have came out, right? Or to even substantiate. I feel like, that they want to get to the bottom of this as well as we do. So what I've been told is that they have the data, they have the information, but the way that it's in like raw numbers. So when they ask for a report, there's no entity that has gone through to kind of clean the data to generate a report. From
It's
what
not
I've
been categorized.
So right now, from what I've been told, that's what they're working on doing. They're going to hire, they have an RFP out, or will be putting out an RFP to get a researcher or a statistician, someone to look at that information and to generate a report based on, what the information that they have. So it's not to say that they haven't been collecting it. They just don't have it in a way that is reportable, or that can really kind of break down the information that as we have done.
This is a key question. If you're taking something out, you most likely have to put something in, right?
Absolutely.
Have you talked to current social workers? Because Rich earlier said, in his knowledge, a lot of the social workers are already extended in their efforts or responsibilities. Have you talked to them about extending their responsibility? The other part I have is, are you looking more to hire people who are more mediators, who focus on mediation, which may be a little different than social work, or even though there's a crossover at times, but people who mediate as a profession might be kind of between a regular social worker and a police officer? Has that been given significant thought in terms of maybe the priority being mediators as replacements?
So so I think that there's many different things that the school district has in place, or supposed to have in place, that would address this. So like restorative practices,
right.
Communities and schools. But one of the things that you just touched upon is that even when we talk about mediators, it may not be a trained mediator, but we have coaches from particular communities.
Sure.
Have cheerleading coaches, people in the community that are very impactful with our youth. So how do we bring those type of people into the equation to be able to address the issues that are happening during school time hours? Because out of school, those are the people who are mitigating some of the things that are happening in our communities.
So maybe one of the things that may have to have happen is a definition, a wider definition of what a mediator would be. So it would include the folks that you just mentioned, who may in fact be the most effective to come in and calm things down.
Absolutely. Redefining the roles, the roles.
Sorry, Kathy. There's some really good youth mediation models where young people, students in the school, are trained to become the mediators. And I've seen those operating in other cities. And I think they're a wonderful way to have youth develop skills to work out some of their disagreements themselves.
And I believe there's a model like that happening in Brashear. Yep. And so don't get me wrong, there are some great things that are happening within Pittsburgh Public Schools, but it's just not across the district, and it's not utilized to fidelity. So again, part of these conversations is what has been put in place, what's working, how do we scale that to be able to be district-wide, and what are some other resources and things that we've not thought of? So as you asked about, have we talked to social workers? Absolutely. In fact, as Sarah talked about, she trains many of them, and even have programs of, some of them doing their internships within the school district. But we know that they are not being utilized in the role that they should be utilized in. And so no, you shouldn't add more work to what they're already doing. You need to add more of them in these spaces, but then you also need to redefine the role that they play within the school building.
Makes sense.
Well,
good to see you.
Well, this has been a excellent presentation and discussion. It has enlightened task force members on the work that is occurring between Pittsburgh Public School Police and Pittsburgh Bureau Police in their interaction. And some key elements have come forth, which is specific to the MOU and understanding who's leading the 7 elements into the discussion. And are there ways of redefining the role that would be more beneficial to to both parties as well as to our youth. We do look forward to getting the report so that we can further review and discuss the data that you shared, because it is an eye-opener. But at this time, we would like to extend our personal thanks to Dr. Elliott, Dr. Goodkind, and Ms. Makushi for taking time to prepare your presentation and discuss this important topic with the Police Reform Task Force. I'm sure you will probably have some follow-up questions as we further review and discuss the data. Say thank you, and I'll defer to my co-chair to see if she has any other remarks to say to our guests.
Thank you, Dr. Bullock. It was an eye-opener. I'm so glad that we had you all as presenters, excuse me, to the task force. And it will help forge recommendations in our report eventually, and look forward to having further information from all of you all as to the role of the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police within the community, particularly with schools. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Again, if you need any additional information, we're just an email away. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Bye.
Valerie, I
Bye.
would you now like to introduce our second guest, Minister Darnell Drury.
Thank you, Dr. Bullock. Yes, I would like to introduce Minister Darnell Drury. He, again, is a person that is of the faith-based community, that is in the trenches with reducing violence and working with community, establishing collaborations with others to basically improve the tone of our communities in terms of violence. And he's been in the, so with, again, you all have, I believe you all have the bio. If not, I would have to defer to staff to see if they communicated the bio. But I just want to, I asked I asked Mr. Drury to just share his personal experiences and possibly some recommendations to this task force. So thank you, Mr. Drury.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Ms. Valerie and Dr. Bullock. Thank you for having me on here. And I did recently learn of this task force, and my interests and hope is that I could be a voice or someone who could help bring the faith-based component to the table, if you will. And so my work as far as faith and the work that I do at the Center for Victims as a community specialist, the senior community specialist, my work has been able to bring those two components together so that I've been challenged and charged to meet with leadership of all faiths to present and train them and to offer the basic training around trauma, and train them so that they are able to walk away with the ability to serve communities and congregations through a trauma lens. And so I think this training, I think this trauma lens idea, having a trauma lens to work with people, work with individuals, specifically having this trauma lens helps provide great mediations between, if you will, police and communities, relations, those things. And so my interest is to try to find and hope that in this particular reform and all of these things that the church or the faith-based organization would be a part of the conversation. And if I could be one of those connectors to helping with, and the faith-based organization, I work with leadership of all faiths, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, Jew, all of them and more. So, and what we do, we meet on a regular basis to address having a trauma, understanding trauma, having a trauma lens to serve and to lead with a trauma lens, with the understanding of a trauma lens. That better helps those mediations. I, thought about what Tim was talking about, when he mentioned mediation, which is right up my, right up my alley when I say, I'm adding those things in the component of having moral aspect to all things that we do. A lot of times we address rights, rules, rights, and regulations, and we address that. We do things, we create legal rights, but sometimes they're not, although they're legal, are they moral, are they morally right? And so that's what I would like to address most of the time, and what I like to help our faith-based organization to address the moral right, not just legal right, but moral. Is it morally right? And so hopefully that's what I wanted to really put on the table, to see to it that the faith-based organization is considered, and whatever the walk is, whatever the movement is, whatever the next steps are, that the faith-based organization, I can be of help in bringing those right people to the table. I'm also the chaplain for the South Pittsburgh Peacemakers. And so my work over there on the South Side is to, if someone desires a connection to the faith-based, that I can, make sure that they're connected to whatever religious ideology they desire. I can make sure those connections are happening or made. So my goal and my attempt is to try to make sure that I build the relationships with people of all faiths, and that there's not just an individual spiritual lens that is brought to the table, but that there is a spiritual lens from all walks of life, all faith bases, And so I just wanted to present that tonight. And as I'm learning and try to learn and understand more about the task force and what work is being done, what desires or hopes are being done in this space, prayerfully that the faith-based organization is added and not omitted from the conversation.
Thank you. Dr. Bullock, if you would just allow me to ask a question. I just wanted to ask you, Mr. Drury, I'll just call you Darnell. You're Darnell.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
As you listen to the conversation, just focusing on our youth and police, what role has the faith-based community, whether it's consortium or individual groups, individual faith-based groups, what relationship have you had with Pittsburgh, the Bureau of Police, in helping to resolve a lot of the problems? Protests have occurred. Many people have been enthused and yet traumatized. It's been a mixed bag of the protests, which are absolutely essential. What role has the faith-based community served, and in which capacity could they serve in helping Pittsburgh move forward, particularly in terms of what we're tasked with? Our mission is reform of police where we can.
Thank you, Valerie. I think that that role has been specifically to mediation, being a mediator between the community between the community and the police, being able to, historically, the faith-based leadership has held some level of authority in community. And so it's not this legal authority or this law enforcement authority, but there is an authority that is held by the faith-based leadership. And so with that authority, they can provide, mediation between the community and between the police, where it seems that seems to be the main thing where, faith-based leaders can help de-escalate situations. So, and that then from that de-escalation, goes beyond and begin to mediate and begin to teach. And one of the things that I'm trying to see that role is being able to teach from pulpits and teach from spaces in the church and synagogue, teach specifically to levels of de-escalation and mediation. Having one of the things that has been very powerful as we do this trauma lens, understanding that leadership in whatever faith component is, leadership has over the years studied and taught from a trauma lens, through a trauma lens. So if I'm a person from a historical intergenerational who is overwhelmed by historical or intergenerational trauma, I will study from that lens, and I will also teach from that lens. And then I begin to pass that all trauma on. So those type of things, you know, being able to teach from the pulpit is a very important piece for us to understand how we can provide, because a lot of times, again, you have leadership who have the heirs of their people, you know, and so where, you know, can allow that space, that platform to be available to mediation between policing and congregation and community as well.
Okay. Another thing. Oh, okay, Tim, hold on one second. It may segue into what you're asking.
Yeah, go ahead.
So how do you currently, how does the faith-based community currently work with the City of Pittsburgh Police, possibly through Reverend Cornell Jones's Violence Prevention Initiative? I probably got it wrong.
GVI.
And the fact that Reverend Burgess, Councilman Burgess, has just he got a preliminary vote of passing on various legislation pieces that add money to the Pittsburgh Police Bureau. Not add, it segregates a part of the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police budget for violence prevention, for outreach, etc. Either it's through Reverend Jones's, I think it's GVI, I may get it wrong, staff help me out,
yes,
or
it is GVI.
the Stop the Violence Initiative. How will the faith-based community be able to intersect with the City of Pittsburgh Police and the administration?
That's correct. It is GVI that we work. We are currently working with Cornell Jones and GVI. Right now, we have been meeting with police chief and their officers. You know, we've been meeting at several of the what is it called? Their roll call. You know, we've been meeting at those roll calls, building relationships specifically with the police officers and the chief of police. We've been showing up to roll call to say how we can be of support in helping de-escalate situations in communities, how we can help mediate situations in communities, providing the space, the synagogues, the churches, the mosques, how we can provide the space to be the neutral ground, neutral space for a lot of people. So even you know, providing that brick and mortar space is a very powerful piece as well for the community. So yes, we have been actively working with Cornell Jones in each zone. We've been going to each zone, meeting with the police chief and their police officers to say how can we be of help in de-escalating. And I would say it's been very powerful. I've seen a couple of videos where there's police officers interacting with, and both of these situations were young Black men, police officers arresting in the midst of arresting a young Black man, have him face down on the ground, and one community you know, peacemaker got on the ground, laid on the ground with this guy, because this guy was fighting the police officers, and the police officers had his knee on his neck. And the guy said, "Can you please take your knee off his neck?" And he got on the ground with the man and told the man, look at my eyes. He said, "I need you to stop fighting." And it really de-escalated the whole situation. The police officer moved his knee, and the man stopped fighting. So just that connection there, to be able to look in another man's eye, who was a non-threatening force, you know. So that was another piece that was very, you know, having people who are really willing to go that further distance to lay on the ground if I have to, you know. So that really helped de-escalate the whole situation. The police officer was able to arrest the man and calm the situation down, calm the suspect down and everything. So those are some of the examples of things that we've seen happen and seen done that would de-escalate a situation, and this young man have an opportunity to fight his case in court, you know, and not on the streets with the threat of death, you know, or harm.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I have two questions, Darnell.
Yes.
One is a suggestion, but the first question is, because we have, it appears, a lot less young people attending churches today than they did certainly when I was a kid.
Absolutely.
Part of my question there is, does the church have the same impact that it would have had 30 or 40 or 50 years ago in intervening And my second thing is a recommendation. You have a pen handy? I want you to write down 4 letters. F as in Frank, B as in boy, D as in David, T as in Tom, FBDT. You know, we like initials, all right, Valerie? I'm suggesting, if you haven't as yet, when you meet with the chief again and with your religious leaders, that the creation of a faith-based de-escalation team, a faith-based de-escalation team that would be volunteers from the church community or religious community, not just the Christian religion, from the religious community, who would be part of a team. They may even have sub-teams by community, but if not, citywide. So when there is something where the police think that having a religious leader or 2 join with the police when they have to go in the community, and maybe they even have T-shirts or polo shirts that say Pittsburgh's faith-based de-escalation team or something in partnership with the Pittsburgh Police Board, whatever, so that there is more of a structured way to respond when there is emotion in the air, and you have numerous religious leaders from across the city who might be willing to be called upon, not every time, but be called upon in different moments. Does that make any sense to you?
I love it. I love it. I love the idea of that. I was just talking to a group where oftentimes, you know, we even see if someone within the church, in the walls of the church or synagogue or mosque, if someone you know, had a mental health breakdown, if there's police officers in the church, they would have these police officers grab them and whisk them out of the church. And so the conversation has been, would it be best to try to de-escalate that situation instead of whisking, instead of adding a law enforcement component to it in front of all these congregants, show these congregants that there's a way to de-escalate a situation. So you begin to humanize a person who may have a mental health breakdown in front of people, begin to humanize them. So a lot of times, you know, history has been shown that people would grab somebody if they had a mental health breakdown in the church. The history has shown that they would grab them and whisk them out of the church, and you would not know what happened to that person from there, you know. And you know, there's no help in that situation. And I agree with what you're saying about the conversation with the disconnect between the church and the young people. I think this other piece of being trained well, having a trauma lens helps with this component, because a lot of times without this trauma lens, people don't know how to connect with people. And you have to meet people where they are. If they're living in a place of trauma, and then they live in that place of struggle, you have to go there and get there with them. You have to understand it. You got to bring them. You got to get into that space with them. So I think the disconnect is really the relationship building, because a lot of times we may look through the lens of judgment versus the lens of trauma, understanding trauma. So when we begin to look to the lens of judgment, that begins to create this divisive wall and the disconnect between the two. But we have a trauma, you begin to come with a very sympathetic and empathetic heart. And when you begin to build that lens of trauma and understanding trauma. So those are the things, and those are the things that may not even be intentional, but they happen. They just happen, period, with that training. When you begin to understand the trauma and the history of trauma, and begin to understand how the brain works and how the brain and body works when there's a traumatic situation that happens to an individual. Every individual. There's not an individual who will be impacted by trauma who can just get through it without, you know, of course we have this space of resiliency and all these, you know, the ability to bounce back. We all bounce back differently, but trauma has a major impact on our brain and body. And when we begin to understand that, we can begin to have a more sympathetic and empathetic response to people who are traumatized. And that's how you build relationships, when you begin to understand people and understand from where they come.
Do we have any questions from task force?
I guess I would just ask, first of all, thank you so much for being here with us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
From a pretty broad perspective, you understand what this task force is doing. We're looking at so many different things. From from the faith-based community, is there one or two things that you are really focused or hoping that we're going to include in our report? I just want to make sure I understand sort of your priorities.
I think for that would be for me, which I've been charged and challenged to do, is really help, parishioners, leaders understand trauma. I have a great understanding of trauma. So presenting the trauma, the trauma training and the lens that leadership would have a trauma lens in place. So I think that's the attitude and the idea that I want to present, that I've been challenged and charged to do, and it's been working very well with all faith. There's no disconnect or divisiveness, no matter what faith base comes to the table. They've all been understanding, because trauma is a human issue. It's not a religious issue. It's a human issue. And so as human beings, we can understand it. And as human, and all of our brains work the same when it comes to trauma. All of our brains don't work the same when it comes to religion. All of our brains do not work the same when it comes to morals and legality and all that stuff. But all of our brains work exactly the same when it comes to trauma. So I think that trauma lens is such an important and unified place to work from.
Darnell, are you teaching that to the police or to the religious community, or both?
I am teaching that I'm doing that with both, yes. Every month I've been I've been out, of course, not during this COVID period, but every month for about 3 years now, I go out and do PTSD with the police. And every month, probably twice a month, I have the faith-based initiative with, at Center for Victims, where I walk them through. And I hope and pray that we be able to open the doors again, so that if any of you have not been through the second floor of the Center for Victims, you'll be able to walk through the trauma exhibit, which is very powerful. It's a very powerful exhibit. And so we're still presenting that. We're finding ways to present that by Zoom, but there's nothing like actually being in the space of the exhibit and learning trauma and understanding trauma. And we've been walking through police officers as well as parishioners through this trauma lens, having this trauma lens. It's a unified, it says, to Sharon's point, it's a place of unity where we all understand it, no matter what area you come from, no matter what background you come from, we all understand this.
Can I follow up on that? When you say you're doing PTSD training with officers, is that to deal with their own PTSD, or
That's correct.
Okay.
That is correct. And it actually does both, because it begins to deal with their own PTSD. Some of the police officers some of the veteran police officers have testified that they really wish they had that lesson and understanding before they got into it, because they were now 20 years in and not had an awareness, or they may have made some judgments that did not realize that it came from trauma, from post-traumatic trauma and post-traumatic stress. And then this also, when you gain this lens, it also helps you learn what you might be dealing with, because most of the time we have taught society, we have taught to address people either from criminal or crazy. That's the two components, and those are the two systems that we have set up. We have set up the criminal system and the crazy system, mental health or criminal. We only go to those. But when we get this trauma lens, we can address people from this trauma, this very empathetic and more sympathetic, empathetic lens or perspective, where you begin to connect and tie in with people from their trauma, from the place of trauma. So both things happen. They get their own understanding of what they're going through, and the understanding of what someone else is going through that they engage with.
Right. So we're looking, I may just want to talk to you about this more. We're looking at officer wellness and things we can do to help support mental health of our officers. Sure. And so I'm curious as to whether this is like a voluntary, if people want to come to your program, they come to. Anyway, maybe offline we can have a conversation.
Absolutely. Let's do it. You know what? I'm one of the things personally, I just really have a heart to see people being well, and doing well and doing better. So, and a lot of times we don't. There's some people just don't have the resiliency component, a strong resiliency. But there are strategies and structures that can be put in place for every individual that can create wellness and self-care to be able to operate as a citizen in society.
Thanks.
Yes.
Minister Drury, is it also safe to say that the faith-based would support the recommendation for a faith-based de-escalation team?
I would believe that. I love the acronym that was put out there. I really believe that would be something that would absolutely be well received by the faith-based organization, especially the leadership that I work with now, each of them.
Would you be willing to take that back and just get their thoughts and input so that if it should come out, it's not challenged to say that's not what we recommended?
I certainly will.
It has buy-in before it becomes a recommendation.
I certainly will. I will take that to the table and give out a recommendation to Rabbi Ron Simmons of the Jewish Community Center and Reverend Liddy. Those are the two I will give those recommendations to. They will help me spread that recommendation to some others beyond our small group, that we can stretch across the Western Pennsylvania group of men and women who are in leadership. I love the idea, and I will definitely do that recommendation for tomorrow.
All right, very good.
Absolutely.
Brother Bullock, I had a follow-up, if I may. What you just described, Darnell, is any training of that nature done with the current Pittsburgh Public School security officers? Do they have any training of that nature?
They have not, well, at least not for me, and I'm probably one of the ones who is at the front on the front lines of those who are being trained throughout Western Pennsylvania right now. So they have not been. We have finally been able to provide this training to young men, boys from the ASSIST program, and it's been working very well. But yeah, no, there's not been a connection to the police, the Pittsburgh police.
The reason why I asked, it was a year or so ago, Sharon McIntosh, who's our Youth Summit coordinator for the Coalition Against Violence, one of BPEP's initiative. We were there on, I don't know if it was after the Sandy Hook killings or one of the big ones. I'm sorry, I can't remember which one it was. And we were talking with about 18 kids who were going to be leading a youth summit at Woodland Hill School. No, Penn Hill School. It's the first time we met with them. I'll never forget this. They said, the whole group said, we feel trauma every day. They said going to school, they're not sure if they're going to be get killed going to school, being in the school, or coming home from school.
Right.
And I never heard a bunch of kids just say it that directly.
Absolutely.
And they all said, we asked, do all of you feel this way? So most of us at our age group did not have that when we went to school. It was just trying to get good grades.
Right.
Now it's if you're going to live to get to the school or come home from the school. And that may put our kids, Valerie, as a former weren't you a board president? In a whole different mental trip than psychological trip than kids were 30 or 40 years ago.
That's right. Absolutely. That certainly is the case. We have to look at kids today because the violence is so great and the trauma is so great. We're not just talking about violence. We're also talking about the lack of resources, other resources in the schools, other resources in the community and homes, trauma, all types of trauma, all types of traumatic experiences that young people deal with on a regular basis. We need to be looking at the young people just as if we looked at war veterans. But when we say the word PTSD, we used to just think of war veterans immediately. But we need to be thinking about that. That's language for children today.
Right. Sad.
Yes. Absolutely.
Thank you for being here.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Well, Minister Drury, we want to extend our thanks for you taking time to bring a faith-based perspective to the conversation. And 2 points that you presented is the trauma/PTSD lens and training that is in place and available with police and the faith-based leaders and the willingness to present the faith-based de-escalation team recommendation to get buy-in from faith-based leaders. So should that
Absolutely.
come out as a recommendation and faith-based leaders are asked to participate, we would want them to participate versus indicate we don't support that recommendation. So we just
Yes,
want
sir.
buy-in up front. All right?
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Thank you.
And thank you for taking time and spending with us this evening. And we will reach back out if we have any follow-up questions.
Thank you all. Thank you all again. And you all take care of yourself.
Hello
Thank
to your
you.
wife for me.
Will do.
All right, task force members, we've had two great discussions today that has shared a wealth of information. We are close to the end of our time, but we do want to just pause to see if any one of the subcommittees have any pressing updates that you would like to share with the group. And if so, we ask that you share it at this time.
I have a special presentation. It's either going to be 11 or 4 on Wednesday, depends on who responds back, because we have a tie. But we're going to do it on Wednesday at either 11 or at 4. We have Commander Jason Lando, who used to command number 5. He's now, I believe it's with vice and drugs and all that. But he's been one of the most community-based commanders I've ever met in my life. And Tiffany Klein Costa, who's heading the community relations piece and has great creds in the community, works well with the kids. And we're going to hear from them, their ideas with regard to recruiting, hiring, training, and education of what they think the police should be getting from a police perspective that we can listen to. So if any of you can get back to me tonight at our email, preferably tonight, if you can be on either 11 or 4, just let me know, and I'll let you know by tomorrow morning which it'll be. But it'll be this Wednesday at 11 a.m. or at 4.
Thank you, Tim. Dr. Harris?
Yes, thank you. The use of force group will be getting another set of recommendations, a memo, whatever you want to call it, tomorrow or Wednesday from me. I promise it will be short and to the point, because I think what we've heard in the last couple of meetings will allow us to close in on some things. I just also wanted to make a suggestion. I know that there was a lot of talk last time about different people to invite in. I don't have anybody in particular in mind, but I did want to say that it had been pointed out to me by a community member that nobody from the LGBTQI community had been asked about coming to speak to us. So wanted to put that on the table for the group, and you know, maybe we should think about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Good point. Bobby? Bobby?
Just wanted to report that the accountability, transparency, surveys, culture, or whatever else was tagged onto our committee will be meeting at 8:30 tomorrow morning via WebEx that I'm hosting. So we will have more to report back next week.
Thank you. Ala, did you have an announcement? Alea?
Wanted to make a very quick set of reminders to the group as we continue to try to do our best to meet everyone's requests. A reminder that committee leaders are responsible for scheduling their own committee meetings. And if you would like someone, staff present at your meetings to take meeting minutes, you have to let us know in advance so that we can try to arrange with interns if possible. We will do our utmost to meet those asks. Thank you.
Richard, is your hand up, or was that from earlier?
That was from earlier.
All right. Amanda?
Thank you. I just wanted to report that the relations with the FOP subcommittee will be meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. It'll be our first meeting.
Very good. Angela?
I will give a quick update. We had a very informative meeting with Laura Jagrowski from the mayor's office, and then also with, sorry, my voice is going, also with Lindsay Powell. Very helpful in terms of helping us frame what the recommendations would look like coming out of the unbundling group. This coming Friday, we have Department of Human Services.
Very good. Any other comments from any task force member?
Just want to give a shout out to our note taker. She did a wonderful job, Maureen. Is it Hartman? She did an excellent job for us on our subcommittee.
Very good.
Pass that along.
All right. Well, again, task force, thank you for all of your hard work and commitments that you are putting forth to support this important task. We will follow up with minutes, and we will also send out the update for next week, which is focusing on disabilities. Is that correct, Bobby? I have it correct?
Yes. Yes,
Disabilities.
interactions with people with disabilities.
Disabilities, and we'll send out a general overview of that in preparation for the meeting. All right.
I have a question. Is
Just
the
have a
whole meeting, is the whole
Go ahead.
2 hours for disabilities?
I've only asked for a 20-minute presentation, so.
I'm wondering, Dr. Bullock and Valerie, if we can find a couple people from the LGBTQAI community to maybe be the latter part of that call next Monday, if possible.
All right. I will reach out and see if we can get some contacts that we can see if they're able to join us.
And related to that, Dr. Bullock, I'm going to reach out to some folks as well and see if I can, I'll relay to you. I, in particular, want to think about the trans community. I'm imagining that there's a lot of interaction with the police.
Hi everyone, this is Lindsay. Just really quick, I know there was a request last week to have documents translated. They have been, the minutes have been translated in the top 5, I believe, languages that we see in the city of Pittsburgh. But Hirsch will make sure that that's clear in the minute notes that he sends out this week.
All right, thank you. Nate, just to make sure I heard you correctly, you will be reaching out for some contacts.
I'm going to try to reach out, and I'll just keep you posted on what I find, and if we can kind of just relay to one another.
All right.
But I will keep you and Valerie posted on what I find.
Hey, Nat, can you reach out to Lindsay because of the Mayor's Commission, the LGBTQIA+ was just a task force. It is now an official commission. I don't know where they're at with the process, but you may want to just touch base with staff on that one too.
Okay, great. I will do that.
Excellent idea to have. I do a question for Bobby. Bobby, will the disabilities dialogue, will that also entail intellectual disabilities as well as physical?
I believe, yes, comprehensively.
Thank you.
So Valerie, I wanted to ask, did you hear any more from the chief about my request?
It's happening. I'll check back tomorrow. There's no problem, seriously.
Okay, good.
Yeah. And what Richard is referring to, so the task force members are aware, is that, with his communication to everybody, his late night dissertation, or early morning, I don't know what it was, but and Richard has asked for patrol officers, people that are more on the ground with things, to also add input, which I believe most task force members, a number, have already commented on. And Richard mentioned Commander Ragland in Zone 1, the north side. It has some high stats, and they also have community-based station in Northview Heights, which is a low-income public housing community. So going to be working on this. Good idea.
All right.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you. And thank you all again for another great evening. And if there are no further comments or questions, we will end tonight's discussion. Good night, all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.